top secret. I could not have told
We
you.
can't hear you back there.
This way, okay.
Check, check.
That'll drown it out. Okay. I could not have told you this story for many years because on pain of death. But I think it's safe to share it with you now. Go back to the year 1943. Our country was at war on both the East and the West. And submarines were sinking our oil tankers, and Japanese submarines were coming in very close to the coast. And we were in a bad way. I was a senior in college, maybe in a bad way too. But anyhow, I got a summons, something I'd never gotten. Come to the library, to a little back room I'd never seen before. Be there at 10 on Saturday morning. Well, I went all curious, and there were about 7 other women in there too. And in strode a Navy captain. That was his.
Yes, great.
Okay. And he was very brief in his message. He said, "Young women, we need you. There are jobs that are being filled now by men, and we know you have the skill and the know-how to do them. And we need you to come and do it. But in order to do it, you will have to become commissioned in the U.S. Navy because you will have to work with top secret material." Well, I never even thought about getting in the military before. I had all kinds of dreams, as seniors do. But what would you have done at a time like that? I signed right on without telling my family or anything else. And my summer, I graduated from college and from officer training and had my orders to Washington, D.C. Now, when we got to Washington, the very first thing that happened, we were called into a room for a briefing. There were quite a few women there, and he got up, the commanding officer got up and said to us, "I have one announcement to make to you. You will be handling top secret material. If you reveal any of it to anyone, the fact that you are women will not help you. You will be shot." I didn't reveal it. In fact, it was a good many years before I even let my husband or anybody else know what was about. What was about was we were breaking Japanese code. And when I reported for duty in a funny little back room where there were pages and pages of numbered and code books, I found that we were already reading the Japanese code, and we were getting messages that told us what were the positions of the Jap fleet and who was going through the canal from east to west or west to east. And it was great, and we were working hard, but we came to work one day, and there were long faces. The Japanese must have caught on that they were being read, and they had changed their code. The Navy was wild to get at this information. Where was the fleet, and what were they doing in the Pacific? But it was going to take weeks and weeks and maybe months to break the new code. And then a strange thing happened. I came to work the next day, and strung across our office were yards and yards of clothesline, and hanging from it were dripping code pages. We got the word that a 2-man Nazi submarine had been captured in Norfolk Harbor, and the code sheets came from that. It turned out they were the sheets that Japan had made to give the Nazis the equivalent in the new code of the words in the old. What a bonanza. With that help, and in 4 or 5 days working 24 hours, of course, as hard as we could, we began to be able to read the new code. And, you know, we would, you don't know in wartime what battles are being fought or who's doing what, but the words seemed to be better from the Pacific. And we hoped that maybe we had some small part in it. It was not very long before the tide began to change for the United States. And our ships and planes were catching the Japanese. And of course the atom bomb came. And all of a sudden the war was over. Well, it wasn't so sudden. But anyhow, the war was over. There was VJ Day. And of course we were not needed as code breakers anymore. So we were sent to other jobs, and I was sent up to northern New York State, Sampson, the hangnail of the fingernails. It was the grimmest, coldest place with Quonset huts along this bleak lake, and the wind that always blew in your face in a cutting way. And it was a tough place to be stationed. But I'd only been there a couple of days and talked to a couple. There were very few women, a couple of Red Cross gals, who told me, watch out, there are a lot of men here, don't start any flirtations. They're married and you'll have your heart broken. And I got a piece of information, a command, actually from the captain of the hospital. It was a tuberculosis hospital. They thought New York State air would cure people. But there was no cure for TB, and there were boys dying there, sometimes 2 or 3 in the family. So my orders were to report at 10 a.m. under the flag in front of the hospital in full uniform with all ribbons to which I was entitled. Well, Wade's didn't buy ribbons. We hadn't. You know, you had the American victory and things like that. But I never bought them. And here we were in this desolate station, no way to get them. So at breakfast the next morning, I looked around and thought, I've got to borrow some ribbons. And I looked for the most innocent, youthful doctor I could see. And he was well-dressed and wearing his ribbons. And I said, may I borrow those? What for? Well, I told him, and he said, if I can come, okay. So I borrowed them and went, and we had a ceremony under the flag. And the captain very proudly came out and pinned on me a unit citation. I think he thought I was going to be Dolly Parton, and I couldn't measure up. So it was sort of a disappointment for him. But when it was over, the young man who lent me the ribbon said, now I'm entitled to take you to dinner tonight. All right. Well, in that bleak, miserable wintertime, we became good friends. And by the time spring came and the first grass was poking through the frozen ground, well, it was the most beautiful spring I've ever seen, and we were in love. Now, you have to jump fast in this. There are lots of parts of this I'd love to take, but you have to use your imagination to fill in. By next September, we were married. And then you have to jump forward almost a decade. We were back in Norfolk after many travels, and my husband was practicing pediatrics. We lived in an old house in Algonquin Park, and I had 2 children, 2 and a half probably. And one night, oh, well, I forgot just a part of it. I was living there as an avid good doer. I joined every good work community thing there ever was. And one day, I went to the luncheon of the United Nations organization. Maybe some of you remember, Ms. Roosevelt wanted us very much to form local ones. And when I got there, they were very disturbed because the speaker from the State Department was unable to come as the plane was stopped, and they'd had to get somebody to kind of just fill in for it. And they said, oh, it was an admiral or somebody, and he had a story about sinking a Nazi sub in Norfolk Harbor. Why? Lo and behold, he told about how he was head of the flotilla that sank the sub, and he showed some very grainy film of this sub, and we could see, and he proudly told us, that he had ordered his sailors to be ready when the sub was captured, and the Nazis tossed the code books overboard. They were ready with nets, and they hauled the books up. And that's where our saving nets code had come from. So after lunch, I went up to him, and up until that time, I'd never admitted to anybody but I knew anything about Japanese code. But I felt I had to tell him that I was there when the code books came in and what it meant, and I told him about the unit citation. And he was overjoyed. Is that the gong? was getting called up. You all don't remember Major Bose, but that bond was, that night, there was a knocking on our front door, and my kids went running to it fast. My oldest son told me this part of it. When he opened the door, there was a tall man, and he was standing there with a 5-pound box of chocolates. Now, Hap had never seen that much candy before, and his eyes were popping out of his head, and the man said, "May I speak to Lieutenant Reynolds, please?" I had no idea who that was. But he yelled, "Mom!" He didn't want that man with the candy to go away. And when I got there, it was Admiral Johnson, and he bowed and he said, "Lieutenant, I have this. I wanted to share this with you. You've given me the greatest joy I've had in my naval career. I never knew what happened to those code books. I never knew how successful it was, and I want you to share my joy." And he gave me a 5-pound box of chocolate.